All right, well, it's 12 o'clock, so let's just get started so that we have ample time to cover everything that we need to. So everyone that's joining us today, thank you so much for joining us during this Thursday in January. Hope everyone's doing well, staying safe, and of course, healthy. I'm Keith Klein. I'm the founder of VentureFizz. If you don't know us, we're the leading job board and company discovery website focused on the tech industry. I was looking at our job board today and I was fired up because we have the most jobs we've ever had, which is it's crazy. Like you think about the pandemic, but how resilient the tech industry has been it's really astonishing and obviously good for the economy. So there's over 4,200 jobs. Our record before, I think it was 4,160. So perfect day for that milestone. So if you are exploring opportunities, there's lots of jobs on VentureFizz for you to check out. And of course, Drift is hiring, so we're going to be talking about that too. But I've got this amazing hoodie on, and we're twinsing today. And this is courtesy of Caitlin at Drift, which thank you to Caitlin for helping organize this event and sending some swag for this event. That was super cool and fun. Drift always has amazing swag. Like I have a t-shirt that I wear all the time too. But this is the first Path event for us. And I'm really delighted to welcome Melissa Leffler, who is VP of Engineering at Drift. She is one of the best engineering leaders, not only in the Boston tech scene, but across the whole tech scene across the country. So she's going to talk a lot about Drift, but they are a revenue acceleration platform and one of the fastest growing companies in the tech industry as well. So the whole goal of this and why we started putting this event series together is to share a lot about somebody's background. How did they get from A to B in their career? Plus some critical decisions they made along the way. And the whole goal of this is to provide you with useful advice to help you carve out your own career path. So we're going to have Q&A, save some time for Q&A. So there's a little chat function that like don't use that for the questions, use the Q&A. That way it all goes into a queue and then we can visit the Q&A towards the end of this. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm always like promoting myself on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect on LinkedIn, just send me an invite. I will connect there. I'm going to put it, I'll put my LinkedIn handle in the chat function, but send me a connection. We can go from there. All right, Melissa, thanks again for joining us.
So happy to be here.
We've got a lot to talk about. You've got an amazing career. So let's just, dig right in. Let's go back, right? Early days of you, right? So kind of like, where'd you go to college? How'd you get involved in tech and computer science?
Sure. I went to Boston University, so I'm one of those people that came to Boston and never left. I was a double major in computer science and English, and I toyed with getting a graduate degree in computational linguistics, which was a super new field back then. But I also was bootstrapping my way through college, and I wanted to go off and get some real experience and make some money. So I ended up, one of my early customers, I mean, I worked through school, but one of my early jobs was Lotus. And so Keith and I talked a little bit about that. Probably many people on the call don't remember Lotus. It was a long time ago, but
a critical part of history of what we do today. I mean,
yeah.
I was using Lotus 123 back in college. I mean, basically it was one of the early creators of the spreadsheet. Like Dan Bricklin created the spreadsheet, right? Like he's like known as the creator, but Lotus took it to the new level. And then there was so many amazing products that were the foundation of what we do today around workforce collaboration.
Definitely. All the way to notes, and IBM ended up acquiring Lotus, but Lotus was a great place to learn. So I went to Lotus and was a developer on a super technical product. I was like a total database geek. There's something called DDE, and the way the applications didn't communicate data across each other yet. And I helped be part of the SQL Access group that Microsoft chaired. And we defined the database protocol that applications use to communicate data on. So I was super back end, super geeky, and loved it, and was growing my career. One of my first bosses said to me, I'm going to work for you one day, when I was like a college student. And I was like, what? And I think what he identified, which is something I've seen over and over again, is that it's that curiosity, and it's that constantly trying to learn and improve. And so apparently I did that early on. And I work with a lot of people who do that as well. And then there was a period of time when object-oriented programming just came out, right? Like I was assembly, C, like really back-end stuff. And I wanted to stay technical and achieve an architect level at object-oriented programming, because at that point I did know I'd be in leadership, but I felt like building that technical foundation would really hold me well. And that once I ended up being more of a manager and leader, I would lose the ability to grow that system level thinking. Um,
So this is a key point that I think is important to recognize. So if you are an engineer, you know, this is like a sidestep. How important is it to, you know, keep technical, and for how long should someone remain kind of building up their technical chops before starting to move on to management or leadership?
that's a great question. I know we talked about that before, Keith, is that um, I feel like really building that technical foundation is important. It'll help you become a better technical leader. And there's a lot of career paths right now that allow you to do both. There's constant growth. Like at Drift, we have small teams. You can be a tech lead, managing 2 people, but still continue your technical growth. Um, I have an article to recommend for people. If you Google Stripe engineer career growth, you'll find an article from Raylene Young. I'm a big fan of hers. And she has a really great article about talking about building the technical foundation as well as growing as a leader and what some of the key things are. So I definitely recommend that article for anyone who's thinking about your own growth. Um, and I think that the end of my story is I ended up not achieving architect before I moved into management because they ended up putting a manager over me, and it was not a great fit, and it was not
Mhm.
going well. And so after about 3 months, I raised my hand and said, okay, uncle, I'll manage the group. And it certainly didn't hurt my career, but back then I felt like it was either or. Nowadays, I feel like there's a lot of ways to establish technical leadership and continue to grow technically and managerially. But once you go down the management path, like if you want to be a good leader, you need to take that seriously. You need to grow in those areas. And sometimes growing at both at the same time can be overwhelming.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. All right, let's continue the career progression. So after Lotus, what did you do after that?
After Lotus, I went to smaller companies. I did something that was we kind of spun off from Lotus for a while, but then I ended up starting a company called eRoom with 2 other people who've been in the Boston area for a while who are fantastic. Jeffrey Beer, who was a VC for a while, and Pito Salas, who teaches at Brandeis now. But being like employee number 1 and working with them on building that company was amazing. I mean, we sat down and like Drift had a set of Lotus had a set of operating principles. We established our own operating principles. And we just built value for the customer, and the company ended up being very successful. We did almost IPO right when the market crashed. Like we had drunk champagne on the balcony, and then the dot-com bubble burst. And we ended up getting acquired by Documentum and then by EMC. And the product's actually still in use 25 years later. It's amazing.
And what was
Uh,
the product? Because it was not the collaboration type of.
yeah, it was like collaboration software, but it was like kind of pre-wiki, pre-everything. And
Mhm.
so like one of our patents from that company was in a web browser being able to drag and drop. Like that hadn't been done yet. So,
Wow.
but really the success of eRoom is a great story because eRoom was always a nice to have. And so the fact that we were able to be so successful with all of the market fluctuations and kind of build that value for the customers and do some really innovative stuff along the way was great. But that was an amazing basis for me to think about how to build the right culture, how to scale a company, how to scale a team, and doing it with a set of other great leaders. That was just a fantastic entry into being an entrepreneur and building a company from scratch.
I mean, you were working at an established company, Lotus, but then you went to this, you know, it was a startup. It was just 3 people, yourself included, right? So what did that experience teach you kind of that at that stage of your career of joining a company at such an early stage and then starting to scale it and ended up being a success?
I think it really taught me the whole customer life cycle or product life cycle, right? So I think at a lot of companies, you build software and understanding the full value of what it means for the customer and how you can provide that value. And again, we didn't really have an established market. Like SharePoint was kind of out there. It was much worse than it is today, even. So it was kind of a new category. And I think being part of that leadership team and figuring out how to grow that value for customers in a new market was invaluable, because before that I had mainly just focused on building great product. And I think everyone, well, not everyone, but many people have had the experience where you build great product and it's not incredibly successful. And
Mhm.
that's not incredibly rewarding.
And this was the first company, I believe, that was, venture backed, that you were a part of, right?
Yes. Yes. In fact, when I went in, we didn't have financing yet. They were trying to get another technical person to get financing. And um, our VCs were great VCs who had a lot of experience and continued to be very close partners with us as we built the company. So overall, it was just a great experience.
Yeah. Okay. So what was next?
What was next? We're not going through all my jobs, are we?
Yeah, we don't have, we
Um,
could kind of do a quicker version, abbreviated,
yeah.
but
Um, uh, so with eRoom, it was amazing. And then after about 5 years, which was kind of a theme in my next couple jobs, is when the challenges coming across my desk weren't as exciting, I knew it was kind of time to move on. And
mhm.
so even though I had the fondest regard for eRoom and everything we were doing, it was time. I think that the interesting thing I learned near the end of eRoom is, I mean, I had engineering, I had all different groups at different times, including like sales engineering and support and professional services. And what I learned was that as I managed larger and larger groups, and as I spent more and more of my time with executives, that I really like building product and I really like working with people who build product. And that's where I get a lot of my excitement and motivation. There's someone named Molly Graham who asks these 4 questions that I think are really important for you thinking about what you love to do. And I didn't know about these questions back then. And she uses strong language on purpose to have you really think about it. And the 4 questions are, what are you amazing at? What do you love to do? What are you terrible at? And what do you hate to do? And I think a lot of times you end up doing more and more of the things you're really good at, without stopping to say, how exciting is this for me? How motivating is this for me? So what I learned is I got to like the VP over VP level and I was just not as motivated. I really like building product. So that was a great learning for me, is that the path for me wasn't just that. I chose to really stay on the product side and the engineering side.
And I think those are honest questions that people should ask themselves, because you're going to spend so much time working, so you might as well enjoy what you're doing and leverage your strengths. And I remembered, so my background is recruiting, and I remember when I was just cutting my teeth in recruiting, I had like a similar thought of like, okay, the next step would be to manage a team of recruiters. But I like dealing with clients, and I chose to stay in a frontline position of doing what I was doing instead of managing a team, because I just enjoyed dealing with customers and helping grow teams. So I think that's an important piece. And Molly Graham also talks about, she's famous for her give away your Legos piece too. So what does that mean?
Yeah, I think, well, and I only heard about Molly Graham at Drift. She's spoken to us and to our managers a couple of times. I think throwing away your Legos is really appropriate for a company like Drift, because it talks about drifts that are it talks about companies that are in hypergrowth mode. And I think her point there is like change can be hard, right? Like you're doing your thing and other opportunities come in, someone else comes in, and you have to get good at throwing away your Legos so that you can try something new. And she has some great stories she tells about how suddenly she was put over something and she felt like she had no experience in doing it at all. And I think that that advice is very appropriate, like in a company like Drift, where we're growing and there's constantly new opportunities and challenges, to, try not to be nervous and just stick with what you have and try to embrace those opportunities and focus more on, your growth and not worrying as much about exactly what you own at a certain time. Because if you're doing a good job and you're growing and learning and the company's growing and you're adding value, there will continue to be those opportunities.
Yeah. And Melissa's mentioning Molly Graham. So if you Google her name, you'll see the Legos spiel that she gives. She was at Google, Facebook, and lots of startups after that. So she has a tremendous amount of content out there that's very useful for thinking about how to lead high growth teams. So I highly recommend anything that she has put out there. All right. So getting back onto your career path. So after a couple startups, you ended up working as for a nonprofit, right?
I did. I
So tell
did.
about that.
Yeah, there's someone named Paul English who probably a lot of people have heard about, who's, very, very compelling and smart person. I like Paul's great. And he was involved and he kind of sucked me into a nonprofit. And it's funny because if you ask my husband, he'll say, like, in some ways, at least at that point in my career, now it's drift. It's the happiest he's seen me because it was very mission focused. I also had at one point more managers than I did a team, right? Like, it was Brigham and Women, it was Harvard Med School, it was Partners in Health, it was Harvard Business School. Like, I had all these managers from all these different kinds of organizations. But yeah, I was really excited and I convinced a couple of amazing people who also had great track records to come into the nonprofit world, take a little bit of a pay cut, and save lives for people who are basically living on $1 a day and dying of preventable diseases. And so it was super exciting for me. I loved it. But what we realized is that, like, originally we had this vision and this budget. I was going to hire this big team, and we were trying to do something that didn't have, we had to build a great product that couldn't actually rely on being connected to the internet, which, which is, a little bit of a throwback to the old days.
Mhm.
And what we learned is that we didn't need to, I didn't actually need all the budget that we were planning on because we were able to use some existing frameworks and, we went to get a scrappy version out. We used Django. And with the way we used it, it performed all right. So what happened is I'm supposed to build a big team there. And then once we really got into the tech and the product, we didn't need as big of a team. And given what we were trying to do, it was more important to make sure that any of the funding we had was going towards education, community health workers, other aspects of the program to help people. So I ended up kind of working myself out of a job there because it turns out they didn't need kind of someone at my level building that organization at that level.
And then take us through, kind of some of the next steps after that, and then, we'll kind of circle back to drift.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the companies I've been at, I stayed in small companies for a while. And one of the reasons, and it's one of the things that really drives me, is culture of the company. So what I learned is that, establishing that right set of shared values as you're going through growth stages, not growth stages, trying to find product market fit is really important for me. Like, being an authentic leader is extremely important. And when you're in a larger company, you don't have that ability to make your decisions based on that framework in the same way. And so I went to smaller companies for a while because I really loved building product, working with teams, building product, and building the culture and the team of a company that was going to endure and be a great place for people to work and add value to customers. Um, I was at a smaller company called Objective Logistics, amazing people. And we ended up getting acquired by Carbon Black, which is now part of VMware. I mean, it was Bit9 at the time. And I had worked at a security company in the past, and I had spoken to the folks at Bit9 Carbon Black a couple of times, but we had shared board members, and they really wanted me and some of the great developers who worked for them to help them innovate and go into SaaS. And so they ended up aqua hiring us. And then I was at Carbon Black for a little over 2 years. I actually left right before we went public. But I was really missing, even though Carbon Black has a great set of values, I was really missing driving that right culture, right? Like as we were growing and getting ready to go IPO, things were really shifting around how you think about things. And it just wasn't a great fit for how I wanted to lead and where I wanted to go. So I ended up going to a smaller company called Modic. They ended up getting acquired by Acquia. And because they were an open source company and I love open source and I had never been on the open source side, I had just been a user of open source. And I was very happy there. And then Elias, so Elias Torres, who's the co-founder of Drift, reached out to me and I basically ignored him for like 4 months because I figured, I knew him a little. I figured they were looking for a VP of engineering. I was really locked in where I was. And I ended up finally meeting with him because someone who used to work for me wanted to go work at Drift and asked me if I would reach out and give a back door to David and Elias. And I heard through this person and someone else that they hired the VP of engineering. So I thought, okay, it's safe. I can I'll reach out. Elias will want to have breakfast. I'll have breakfast with him. And it turns out that data was not accurate. They had not hired the VP of engineering. So Elias came in to the breakfast meeting with the leadership principles, which is, again, a massive, important hook for me. And I agreed to actually interview the next day, only people on the product team, no executives. I wanted to know if it was real. So back to something you said at the beginning, Keith, a lot of companies have values, but how does it really drive the way we're growing, the way we're building, the way we recognize people? Is it really part of the company's DNA, and what actions actually support that? And so what I learned was that it is real at Drift, and, ended up over the next 6 weeks and then decided to come to Drift. It was a little bit dramatic leaving my last company. And Elias was incredibly pushy about having me start as soon as possible. And it's the best career decision I've ever made.
So how long have you been there, and what does Drift do? I gave a quick little soundbite, but what are the details?
Yeah, I've been at Drift for just over 2 years.
Okay.
And Drift is a revenue acceleration platform. A lot of people know Drift from the widget or chatbot that can show up on people's websites, but we're all about the customer conversation. So there's a lot of ways that customers interact with their customers, but making the conversation the centerpiece so that you can have real conversations and that your own customers can have more control over what's happening and you can better serve that customer is really important and a really great mission from Drift. And so we have all kinds of cool stuff we're doing around that conversation, whether that conversation is in a chatbot, email, video. We have some amazing AI technology, and I know everyone says they have AI. The AI technology we have is really groundbreaking. In fact, I think we're on our third or fourth patent right now. And so on the tech side and how it all comes together and the difference we think we can make in some of these systems between, CRMs and marketing automation platforms and outreach, sales outreach, we're really pulling it all together to have that conversation be the centerpiece so that customers can be handled in a better way. And the results that we're seeing in the market, not only from our main products, but from some customers who are using kind of our AI products, are tremendous.
So how is the engineering team structured? Because it is a little bit unique as far as how teams work together.
It is. It is. And that's another funny thing when you go into a company, right? Like someone like me gets hired because I have a lot of experience, but everywhere you go is different. Like I didn't just have my playbook and you must apply it everywhere you go. But there were some things that I was worried about when I went to Drift and I was wrong. So one of those things was small teams. So Drift has small teams. A team consists of a tech lead and 2 engineers. That tech lead is the manager of that person, not on the comp side, but for growth and shared OKRs for the team and everything else. And so that allows us to give a lot of our technical leaders the opportunity to grow. And that's incredibly important to us. My concern about small teams, so we have a small team of 3 engineers, and then product management and design customer advocates are part of that team. Often those people are across a couple teams. And I was worried about, we're in hypergrowth mode, right? We're adding more teams. So if you have a whole lot of small teams that all have to communicate and have dependencies on each other, that's not going to be that efficient. And when I worked at Carbon Black, much bigger organization, larger teams, lots of dependencies, security software that's not only on-prem server, but SaaS server and endpoints getting installed on people's machines, like very complex product and a lot of interdependencies. So when I came in, I was like, oh, the small team thing isn't going to scale. The work doesn't always line up, right? Like if you have 2 back end and 1 front end and suddenly, the front end person's waiting, you have a lot to do, someone's not there. I just thought the logistics of having only 3 engineers on a team would cause problems. And I am a believer, everything I said can happen. The dependency thing, we actually manage really well. But for the small team, the work doesn't always perfectly line up to the resources. But it doesn't matter because the magic of ownership, the magic of being 1 person out of 3 engineers and owning, creating your OKRs and delivering it, and that kind of ownership and autonomy we can give people is magic. And it makes up for all the other issues. You're not like 1 person on a team of 9 picking something from a backlog, knocking off your 3 story points and not sure what really happens with it or whether it's successful. It's become more and more obvious, like, we've really opened up hiring again, and I've been doing a tremendous amount of interviews, maybe 10 to 20 a week. And, that kind of ownership and allowing people to understand the impact of what they're doing and to own it at that level is really special. And so that's one of the things I really love about Drift is that if you're curious and you're interested in owning something and learning, more so than any company I've been at and many companies I know of, you can do that at Drift.
And does that, because of the way the teams are structured, does it give individuals kind of a taste of managing, like,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
growing into that type of role?
Yeah. And we last year we worked on our job families, and there was this whole thing: is tech lead a role? Is it a level? The management path? Like we have management path defined. We have technical. We have different functions like DevOps, SRE, machine learning, etc. But what's interesting about that is it is really important, and to do that, you need to give people the right support and the right guardrails on how to be a good manager. You need to help them figure out how to coach. You need to check. So for example, every one of our employees has a growth plan, and we do a quarterly survey that says, my manager had a meaningful conversation with me about growth,
Mhm.
right? And we look at that. We look at that when we go to promote, when we go to recognize, when I do skip levels with people, like making sure that if you're only the manager of 2 people and you have other things, like if you want to be a tech lead, your team's growth and development needs to be a priority. And so, we get a lot out of having the tech lead perspective doing that, but we need to provide the right guidance and support and make sure that folks are doing a good job. So it is a really great opportunity for people to kind of step into that leadership management role. And it's not only people's development, but the way we do OKRs at Drift is we have we have company OKRs, and then we have kind of high level group level OKRs. And we're in the middle of this process right now because our next quarter starts February 1st. So kickoff is next week. And basically the team takes the high level OKRs for the business and turns that into what's their team going to do to meet that. We don't tell teams what they're doing. Teams figure it out themselves. So I think that opportunity as a tech lead to be involved at that level of figuring out what's happening, make sure your team's involved, work with your PM, and then help manage those commitments, help come up, define what the outcome and delivery milestones are and what that means. I think it's a real opportunity for people, and it's like I said, I mean, the small team and being able to grow in that way so that people can try it out is magic. And we have some tech leads who are tech leads, and then they're not for a quarter or two, and then we're developing a new product and they'd rather go be more of an IC there. And then as we develop more teams, go back into the tech lead role. Like, you know, people's growth is not linear, whether it goes back to the beginning of the conversation, how much technical foundation do you need? Or whether it's once you're there could be another opportunity that you want to do. And you're like, I really want to build that product from the beginning as an IC, IC as individual contributor, and then go back and forth between being a tech lead. And so I think that that's another important thing to think about, right? Like, it's not linear. It's not like I manage 5 people and now I need to manage 10 people. You know, when I'm interviewing people and I ask about management, a lot of people talk about it in terms of that kind of tiering, right? Well, I manage 3 people and I want to manage 10 people, or I manage individual contributors and I want to manage managers. Those are important components to think about. But when I ask, you know, what you're looking for, like, just progressing isn't a great answer in my mind. Like, why do you want to grow people? Do you spend your extra time on coaching or picking up, you know, more technologies? Like, what inspires you? Just having a bigger team versus growing people. You know, really think about, back to the Molly Graham questions, like, what do you love to do?
Yeah, because I think there is a perception that if you're not moving into management and managing managers and C-level, VP level, whatever, that you're not continuing the growth of your career, but that shouldn't be the perception, right?
Right. Well, I think, and I do have this quote. Do you think I should read the employee quote
Sure.
that I gave you? I sent
Yeah.
this to Keith. I actually checked with the employee today to make sure it was
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
But there's someone at our company who's very high growth, very high potential, like, just great. I mean, we have a lot of people like this, but this person gave me this quote over a year ago. And I actually shared it with the team also, because I think it's good advice. But his quote was, my perceived value of myself in the workplace was highly dependent on external validation, like promotion and recognition. This resulted in me putting a lot of pressure on myself to make decisions in pursuit of these outcomes and led to a lot of stress, ultimately causing his performance to suffer. Over the holidays, it's a year ago, he reevaluated his approach and decided to focus on finding the things that truly excited me. I do my best work when I'm really interested in a problem, and that the score would take care of itself. And now he's much happier and more relaxed. I think what's interesting is when I talked to him today about saying I might use that quote, he said that it's not like a one and done thing. Like, it's not like he had this revelation a year ago and now everything just falls into place. I think, you know, internal validation of are you happy and external validation of are you progressing is something that's extremely cultural for us in the way we work. And so he constantly has to reassess that. Like, he'll get like wound up a little around something, and then he'll have to kind of level set and ask himself those questions again. You know, this is a journey everyone's on. It's not cookie cutter. It's not linear. And I think stopping to assess how you're feeling about what you're doing and what your next step is important.
Yeah, because not everybody that is in like, you don't need to be in management to be a leader, right? There's a difference. So what is the difference there?
Yeah, I know. I saw that you wanted to talk about that. I mean, I'll give like the cookie cutter definition, right? For me, at least. The big difference is management is control and leadership is influencing and motivating.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting for me, especially with technical leadership, is most good technical leaders and good engineers are really good at problem solving, right? Like, we have the answer. Like, our minds immediately go to, okay, what does that mean? What can I learn from it? What should we do? And that's, you know, that's a skill that we all have. As a manager, your job is not to like control your group. Your job is to allow people to bring their best selves to work. And when they come to you with a problem, like, it's like, I still catch myself in doing this. I work on coaching. Hopefully most of the people who work for me will tell you I'm a good coach, but I jump into this mode all the time. And I did it just today. I'm talking to someone. I said, well, I think, and then I go, tell me what you think. What do you think the next steps are? There's a great book called, it's a really quick read. It's called The Coaching Habit. There's another one called Weekly Coaching Conversations, but they have the awe question. It means, and what else? So someone comes to you and brings you something, and it's easy to jump on that problem. It's easy to jump on and immediately start solving it. But continuing to ask, like, what's the real problem here? Like, did you really bring me a problem you want me to solve? Probably not. Let's have a real coaching conversation. Keep saying, and what else? And what else? And what's the real problem? And then often by the time you get there, the person's, doing it themselves. And so I think that that level of coaching, and now it's called servant leadership, right? Another term that I don't think existed 20 years ago. That's what makes a true leader in my mind. It's not gonna, if I just go solve a bunch of problems, it's not gonna scale. There was recently, we had like an infrastructure type issue, and I happened to get lucky and be able to reproduce the thing. And I felt happy because it helped the team, but sad because that kind of hero mode is not, it's not scalable. Like, you want all of your people to be able to grow and learn, and not have to be the hero saving the day, but constantly be able to make really good decisions about their own growth and contributions.
So if someone does make the decision to manage a team, like what advice would you give to someone that's just kind of learning that aspect and how to be a good manager?
Listen, don't come in with all the answers. I think one of the things I see a lot in people who are managing for the first time is that it can be very hard to understand that people have different perspectives. So if you're someone who has a lot of confidence, a lot of technical skill, isn't afraid to speak up, and then you get put on a team where you've got somebody who's got a quieter voice and doesn't put themselves out there, or doesn't have as much confidence, or has a little bit of imposter syndrome. Like, you need to understand that, right? Like, people need to be managed in different ways. There's not like one set of tricks that works for everybody. And I think as a new manager, you're going on your own experience, right? You're going on what works for me. And you need to stop and understand that what works for you doesn't work for everyone. I just had a conversation with someone. They're like, well, in our one-on-ones, I ask how it's going and I didn't know this. It's like, well, that person isn't someone who would be, how's it going? And bam, they lay it all out for you. Like, you need to really establish a coaching conversation with the person and get to know that person. And I think that understanding everyone comes with their different perspectives, and that it's not necessarily the same reality in the way you think, is really important.
Now, as you continue to progress in your career in management and eventually becoming a VP, like what's that role entail? Like what's like the day to day that someone can expect? And of course it's different depending on company and scale of the organization, but just in general, what does that look like?
Yeah, exactly. I wrote that down. I was like, well, in a startup, it's everything from being QA to giving board updates, right? So,
Right.
I think, so it really depends on the org size, and whether you're managing managers and stuff. I think that at a company like Drift, the focus is on building an enduring company. So I'm actually less involved in product at Drift than I have been in the past, which makes me a little sad because I love product. I love finding issues and being in the thick of things. But when I came to Drift, we're in hypergrowth mode. We're hiring. Our focus is to build an enduring Boston company. And my focus is to build a company and a team where we build software better than anyone else.
Mhm.
And so to do that, we had to focus on a lot of fundamentals. We had to focus on basically, establishing the culture, making sure that we celebrated not just all the new flashy stuff, but everything else people are doing. We needed to build out the job families and the growth template framework to make sure we were having those conversations, because there's so much change at Drift that if you can't just throw your Legos, it can be overwhelming. And we wanted to make sure that as we grow and decide and give the opportunity for people to move around, there's two big factors. One is, what's the business priority? And one is where do you want to grow? Unfortunately, when you're a company in growth mode, it's not as limiting. Like some of the startups I've been at, I didn't have a chance to grow the team as much because there weren't those growth opportunities in the company. So my day to day is, well, right now it's a lot of hiring. Um, I have the opportunity to, connect with the teams on a biweekly basis, although I've been skipping those meetings lately and just watching the video recap, which makes me miss my team. I think looking at overall scale, right? Like for the day to day, I have a great leadership team that I've had the privilege to build out that handles a lot of the day to day.
Mhm.
And now I need to think about what that looks like as we continue to grow. What are the things we do that are awesome that are going to start to be less awesome as we add more teams? How do we think about, large initiatives and architectural initiatives and UI consistency and enterprise level quality? And we have an amazing CI/CD pipeline, but some customers want stuff released out, right? Like I think I spend a lot of my time on those kinds of issues, looking at where we are and where we want to get to, and trying to get ahead of the extra thing we need to build in to make sure that we can handle those new challenges well.
Yeah. And what's the size of, I mean, general like size of Drift as a whole in terms of employees, and then the size of your engineering organization?
Yeah, I think Drift is probably at about 400 now, and engineering's at about 80.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
We have a series on VentureFizz called Lead Her, and it's sharing the stories of women in leadership roles, usually VP or above. So we need more women in leadership roles. So what are your thoughts on building more female leaders, especially in engineering?
that's a great question. I have a lot of thoughts on that. What's interesting is, I mean, most people have probably heard of the book Lean In. And when it first came out, I didn't read it for a couple years. I got it and everyone was talking about it. And I was kind of like, I'm not a female leader. I'm just a technical leader. Like, I don't think of myself that way. And then I finally read it and kind of felt ashamed of my attitude in some ways, because I think that, I think there's a reason we don't have as many female leaders in tech. And I think grabbing that seat at the table and feeling the confidence to be able to do that can be harder for some women. And there are some circumstances where it's harder just because of biases. So I think that, as you see more and more female leaders, it also really gets easier. And so I started, getting a little more involved in some of that myself, and at least taking responsibility and admitting I was a female leader. And I think that even when you even when you're interviewing people and assessing people, like doing it in a multifaceted way and understanding, like it's not just about the coding interview and just about the architecture interview and just about who does well in an interview situation. But like our job families have a lot of other kind of skill areas and competencies, one of which is influencing and leadership. And so we ask questions when we're interviewing people about, did you experience any biases and how would this person be a culture add? And we're making sure that our scorecards, when we're talking about people, talk about bringing the whole engineer, that the, the, the whole person there, and not just the technical skills. And that we're making sure that interview style, by focusing on the data and the specifics, doesn't impact our decisions. So we look for specific examples and details. And the other thing I'll say about female leadership is, what I've experienced, especially in the last couple of months, is that at least with the folks that have been in our pipeline, um, tend to change jobs less frequently, tend to be more cautious, tend to be more loyal. And so I think that understanding how people think about career change and whether they put themselves first, given their entire situation, whether they put their learning and growth first, I think females don't tend to do that as often. So I think, as we look at managing, like talking about how to bring quieter voices out, which isn't just female, there's a lot of, introverts who are in engineering, and kind of leveling the playing field and the way we speak about different things, and making sure that the way we have conversations about technical things involve all voices. Um, we have we have a really good way of how we measure ramp and onboarding, and we try to assign buddies and mentors and make sure that um, we allow people to jump into something by giving them the support and guardrail and suggesting it, and not just having you sit there and say, okay, I'm going to volunteer. So I think there's a lot of work that all companies have to do on this, and I'm spending a lot more attention on it, and I have a lot more conversations with other leaders about how you can create that environment that brings out the best in everybody.
Yeah. What does the interview process look like for the, I'm sure it's probably different depending on the role, but in general principle, like what's the interview process like for the engineering team at Drift?
Yeah, we have, we tend to move pretty quickly, and we've gotten pretty good survey feedback on our interview process because we ask everyone in a survey. We have a coding section, we have an architecture section. They're not the sections where you have to like go study, take time off your current job and study for 2 weeks, like some companies. And we do another section where we kind of dig into your experience and ask for specifics. And then you'll do an informal with me. And depending on whether it's a management role, there could be some other components to that. I think talking about specifics and your specific experience is really important. And then throughout it all, I'll flash my favorite things again. We focus on this too, because we want to make sure that the kind of culture we're building is really important. We want to make sure that's exciting for you and not unexciting. So for example, put the customer at the center of everything you do. If you're a developer who isn't is interested in the customer, how the customer receives what you do, and you just want to kind of be on a team and pick something off, probably not the best spot, because we want people to be customer focused. Extreme ownership is the same thing. Like if you're excited about that, that's great. If you're not excited about that, and so we have different questions that we weave into the different areas of the interview that kind of test on, curious learning machine and stay scrappy and all our different leadership principles, high standards, to make sure that, you not only will be excited about your leadership principles, but you'll be a culture add.
Well, I did already switch over to the Q&A. That was one of the first questions. So
I saw that.
So if anyone else has questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I've got some here, so I think these are great. Now that we're all remote, how are you fostering the informal collaboration that can happen in person? Because how do you lead a team now remote? Like that's just such a different scenario. And now like Drift made the announcement of being remote first, right? Is that, yeah. So
digital first, yeah. Yeah, I think that's an amazing question, because I think it's something that everyone's personally struggling with it, and then companies and leaders are struggling with it. Drift was very much an in-person culture, like very much so. And the energy and excitement and collaboration in the office was really amazing. So for us, it was a big shift. We were one of the first companies to tell everyone to stay home. In fact, it happened at like 1 a.m, and some people hadn't checked their email and they rolled in the office and then went home. But Drift has been very careful. Like our CEO from the beginning was like, we want our employees to be safe. We want our customers to be safe. Like, let's cut this. And we've continued to look at when we would open the office and move that out based on, unfortunately, how the world is going. And then just about 2 weeks ago, our CEO announced that we're going to be a digital first company. I think before that, we were doing what a lot of companies were doing, which was we were sending out surveys. How many people want to be in the office 5 days a week, 2 days a week, 100% remote, and gathering that data. But something that David Cancel said was, the hybrid environment doesn't always work, right? Like imagine you're on a team of 3 developers and one's 100% remote and 2 are in Boston, right? Especially with the small teams, that's tough, or different time zone for one person. And so I think that being a digital first company doesn't mean you can't go in the office, and we're going to have all kinds of collaboration space and everything there. But it removes the in office, people who are in the office versus people who aren't. And so that's why Drift made that decision. We didn't want to be stuck in the hybrid mode where remote people were always like a different class, that didn't get the water cooler chatter. And I appreciate that leadership. You know, at Carbon Black, I think probably 80% of my team was remote, you know, and the team was, I mean, I had a lot of different jobs there, but, you know, at one point, probably 100, I don't know, 150, 175. And then the other two were spread, the other 20% or 25% were spread across 3 different locations. And I was on Zoom all day, and you learn to connect. So Drift made that announcement. And, you know, probably 5 of our engineers are already moving to different states, right? Actually, more than 5. And so I think that how we do that collaboration. So because we used to be so in office, it was pretty informal. Like we don't have, you know, every team didn't have a formal stand up. They'd do the stand up in Slack and they'd be near each other. A lot of teams started doing, you know, actual stand ups. We have some teams that have their team or squad get together. We have like a dance dog party that happens. As an engineering team, we used a couple different tools, you know, and if you Google, there's a lot of cool tools out there. I mean, some of what we use is Gather. We use Mixiba, which was really fun. We do Gather every week. And then we just found ways for people to connect more. I think that one of the things we're working on is that something I spoke about earlier is that in Zoom, it can be harder for some people to speak up and to make sure everyone's included.
Mhm.
So we try to, you know, we used to be pretty good about not having a lot of meetings. And now that everyone's remote, there are more meetings. And so we need to continue to work on ways to make sure that we structure the meetings and the agenda in a way that there can be some async prep and then everyone can talk. And it's not just kind of the people who are most prepared or the loudest voices or the experts, to bring out all the different voices. So I think that's going to be something we need to continue to work on. As far as what it means for Drift is, we're still hiring people. You know, we have our office locations are San Francisco, Tampa, and Boston, and London. And we're still hiring people in Boston, and people will still get together like once things open, which, you know, right now we said not till June 1st, and then we'll assess whether June 1st works given what's going on. Team wants to, you know, if a team happens to be based in Boston, they want to go in once a week and can collaborate with each other, great. We'll have conversations. We'll have special space set up for teams to work together. So we are still looking in those locations, and then those locations will have the ability to use conversation spaces and go to an office, but we're also looking all over the place.
Another question. If you're giving one-on-ones, like what's the difference in terms of the structure of that conversation between maybe a manager and an engineer and then a VP and a manager? So that's like, if you're just starting out managing, you're probably doing one-on-ones with engineers. So what should that look like? But then once you become a VP and you're having one-on-ones with managers, what's the difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've done a lot of work on one-on-ones and like having to coach those things. I think that for a manager managing an individual contributor, a lot of times the one-on-one can be about like the work that's happening, right? It can be very easy to just talk about, oh yeah, you're doing that, what's going on there, blah, blah, blah. Oh, maybe we'll jump into the code a little, I'll give you a code review. And then you're not making space for kind of the broader conversations in the coaching, unless the person who works for you is one of those people that can like, wants to raise their hand and bring up an issue and say, I have a question, which a lot of people don't. So some people do something where, you know, they have weekly one-on-ones, and then once a month they have one that's either a little bit longer or focused on growth, or they'll bring up the growth plan. And then again, we have the managers do skip levels, and then I do skip levels too, although not as quickly, not as often as I'd like to, because there's a lot of people. And so I think that the most important thing there is to leave this space to make sure you're having the right conversation, right? So something that we've done, like with all different challenges, right? Like when we all started being remote, like I had my managers kind of lean in with people and say, okay, how many people are adapting well to this? How many people aren't? How many people might need more support? So we're constantly kind of looking at that a little bit broadly to make sure that we're, paying attention to what's really happening for our folks. At the manager level, I mean, it really depends. I think one of the big differences is that at the manager level, the manager, like let's say it's VP to manager or director, the manager or director drives more of the agenda, right? They're more comfortable driving that agenda. If you just leave it up to the individual contributor, and then you're like, well, he didn't mention this or she didn't say that. Like you got to make space and help coach that out and build that relationship. I think at the manager director level, it's more, it's more driven by that manager or director. And my typical one-on-ones, I mean, people will, people have their topics ahead of time. They're supposed to send them to me ahead of time. Sometimes they do. And we're using a new software package that I think will work better for one-on-ones called Lotus. But they'll basically drive the agenda. And then often for the people who work for me, they have the teams they're managing, but then they'll have a side project too that affects all of engineering, whether it's milestones or OKRs or, escalation training or setting SLOs for the team. I try to make sure that everyone who works for me has some project that expands into all of engineering. So often we'll talk about those things as well, but it's theirs to set the agenda and what the most important thing is. And then I think the final thing is that, at the manager level, something that not just in the one-on-ones, but as far as how you think of a manager, making sure you're giving the right visibility at the right time, right? Like my expectation, which is often met, but not all the time, is that if there's an important issue going on, I don't have to remember to ask you what happened on it next week. You've either told me in Slack or you've got it on the agenda to close the loop with me. So I don't have to have my own list of oh, did Keith handle that? I have to check. And I think that doing that as a leader and as a manager is really important, is understanding it's not just about you executing with your team, but it's how you give the right visibility to any issues or any amazing accomplishments that your team or your employees are doing.
One more question. This is a great one. So what criteria do you look for in terms of promoting someone from an individual contributor to a manager role?
That is a great question. I mean, we have a whole write-up on this on the wiki. I think that, the first thing is tech lead is a role, not a promotion. So, but we do have, when someone becomes a tech lead, you're an acting tech lead. And then there's a point when, through a conversation with the employee, you become a tech lead and not just acting. And part of that is to see if you like it, as well as to see if you're doing a good job with it. I think there's four different things we look at for a tech lead. But, the main gist of it, since I know we're almost out of time, is are you doing a good job with your team? Are your employees performing well? Are they growing? Are they happy? And are you delivering results? Right? You can have a team where everyone's happy, but they're missing all their OKRs. That's
Right.
not great either.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's, in a nutshell, because I could go on and on about this. I think that's the most important thing is we measure how your teammates are doing, what their happiness is, what their results are, and how good of a job you're doing at that.
Very, very cool. That's a perfect way to segue to wrap things up. Melissa, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background, all this great advice. I mean, so much we got out of this that's, practical and inspirational. And this is the first time we did this. So I'm probably going to send out a survey to everyone that attended just to get your feedback, see what we could do better, because this is the first time I did this type of event. So I'm sure there's room for improvement, but that would be my improvement. Melissa, you nailed it. So I'm going to just add my LinkedIn to the chat function. If anyone wants to connect on LinkedIn, definitely send me a invite. Happy to do so. And is Drift hiring?
Drift is hiring all levels, all functions, product design, product management, engineering, managers, leaders, directors, engineers, back end, front end. I think, right now we're starting off a couple new initiatives. So we're looking for people who are like senior and excited about doing that. But we are hiring and the company's hiring, and obviously I'm incredibly biased and you got this out of it. But if you care about growth, if you're a curious learning machine, if you want to be part of a company where you can get visibility from the board level and, the whole customer life cycle, Drift is really unique in there. And I want more people to come in and help me continue to build a great culture and an enduring Boston company. So please reach out.
Yeah. Check out all their job listings on VentureFizz. You go to venturefizz.com/drift and you'll see all their listings there, plus lots of other great stuff about their culture. Melissa, thanks again for taking the time. I know you're super busy, but this was awesome. I appreciate it.
Keith, I'm so happy to finally do something with VentureFizz. I really admire you and your organization. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for your support. And Caitlin, thanks again for your help pulling everything together. See you, everyone. Stay safe.